Can you shift your identity with precision and predictable results? Why is this even important? It basically comes down to how quickly do you want to create the life that you want to live? Because that's 100% dependent on your identity. I've seen many videos about this topic, but none of them tell you how to actually do it. Because what they're really doing is they're taking a metaphor and they tell you how to apply the metaphor. They tell you to just apply the metaphor to your life. But there's an enormous difference between metaphor and the real life steps and details it takes to transform yourself. And no, affirmations, fake it until you make it, and vision boards ain't it. If that really worked, this whole thing would be settled. And maybe it works for some people, but those things have never worked for me. And everyone I talk to who swears that stuff works, I mean, I can observe in their life it's not working. So what I'm going to be showing you here is really some advanced NLP, and you might not know the first thing about NLP, but that's okay because there we go. Because this is an understanding that you're going to go deep with over time and you'll keep returning to. And this video will be up for you to keep coming back to. And that's what it's going to take because this took me years of applying, coming back to the theory, applying and coming back to the theory. So if you don't get all of this in this first time you watch this, that's okay. You might even have some advanced NLP practitioners watching right now, and they're probably not going to get it the whole way either because I don't know anyone else who's teaching this. It is quite advanced, and they're not really teaching this in NLP trainings. And you might be wondering, what is even NLP? Well, glad you asked, because we're going to get into this. I have a new toy. So this is going to be the theory, and we're going to dive into this. This is the technology. And this is the model that we're going to use. Now, I will keep clearing my screen, and no, I cannot go back once I clear it. So once the video is, once we're done, it'll be recorded. You can always come back to this. Okay, so what is scope and category? Let's dive into that. Let me clear my screen. So we have scope and category. And by the way, this is a theory that was created by Steve Andreas. If you watch a lot of my videos, you know he mentored me. He was an NLP legend. He's since passed on, unfortunately. And he was amazing. So he created this theory called scope and category. Now, many NLP teachers have tried to create some sort of unified field theory for NLP, and they have never really been able to create that. Steve came along, and I think he nailed it. And so what are we talking about when we're talking about scope? Yeah, that's my terrible. Let's try that again. A little bit better. Okay. So scope is where you put your attention. So we can say they are representations. And so most of the time when we're talking about NLP, we're talking about your internal representations. How do you know you have the memories you have when you imagine things? How do you know that they're there? So really that's the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. This is often referred to in NLP. This is NLP 101, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Now, it is possible that we do include smells and taste, especially if you're like a chef or sommelier. You would probably create representations that include smell and taste, but most people in general don't. If you have them, if you think about what you did yesterday, and that's a memory, and so that's represented in your mind, and you're going to access that through visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, or a combination of these three. Chances are you don't think about the smells that you smelled yesterday. You don't think about the taste you tasted yesterday unless you tasted something that was, really good, like you had a nice dinner or something like that. All right. So this includes the modalities. It's just another way of saying your five senses. But when we call them modalities, we're really talking about what's happening inside of us. And you might be wondering, does scope apply to what we're accessing outside of us? And yes, it does. It's whatever you're putting your attention on. So I'm looking at a screen right now. If I turn my attention this way, I see a door. So scope is anything that is being represented externally or internally. It's all what I'm seeing, hearing, whatever is coming through my five senses. Also, the representations internally, all my five senses, or there's probably not all my five senses when I think of a memory, like I was mentioning. And it's the structure as well. You might be wondering, what do I mean by structure? And we'll get into that. And one of the things I can refer to as structure is submodalities. So if you're not familiar with submodalities, you have the modalities, which is basically your five senses. We're really going to be referring to the internal stuff, not the external stuff. So it's how do I represent my reality internally? And by the way, you are living from your internal representations. You think you're living by your external, what you're seeing, hearing, feeling all around you. But the truth is you're actually living in your self-created simulation. That's not theoretical anymore. Neuroscientists have narrowed this down. You are living in a simulation that is based on your internal representations. And this is why scope is so important. And what we know about scope is that it's the content that's being represented is not as important as the structure of it. The structure of it tells us what to think of it. Okay. We think it's the content. We see an image of something that looks happy or good or whatever it is that's a positive thing, and we assume it's, well, what I'm seeing, right? Or what I'm hearing. But it actually has more to do with the structure. Now, I did a video on this recently talking about that, and I'm going to be referring to some of my other videos because one of the videos that I did on specifically on identity shifting included a client of mine. We put some clips of me coaching the client. We'll be referring to that. The client's name is Paul. There is a link in the description right below this video. If you haven't seen that video, I would say stick with us live for now. Watch the video afterward. But if you're watching this live stream pre-recorded, watch that video first and then come to what I'm talking about here, because I'm actually going to break down some of what I was doing with Paul. I did it a little bit in that shorter video, but here we have the time since we're doing a live stream. We can go in more in depth with that. All right, so what is category? Well, category is basically your evaluations of the scope that you're giving your attention to, that you're putting your attention on. So it is your evaluations, it's your generalizations of this information. It's your beliefs are based on scopes, how you categorize anything. That's why it's called scope and category. It's your feelings and emotions. So you think of something sad, how that is represented, and all that's represented is the scope. Feeling sad about that is the category because you're evaluating that as, well, that's sad. And if you take multiple experiences, and each one is going to be its own scope, but it comes together to formulate a bigger scope. And then when we look at that and we say, oh, well, that's my happy experiences, that's my sad experiences. When I'm doing that, I'm categorizing them. I'm generalizing them. I'm looking at the similarities that they all have. I'm overlooking the differences. And that's what creates a generalization or a belief. It's the same thing. Now, when I'm looking at or I'm accessing representations internally, and those representations have to do with me, and I take it even further and I identify with those memories and how they're being represented, then that will turn into a belief that I have about myself. So that's your beliefs about yourself. So you're basically categorizing yourself a certain way based on the scopes that you're paying attention to. If you don't like the way you're categorizing yourself, what do you need to do? you need to put your attention on some different scopes. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more later, but people will ask me that question. Well, if I feel like I'm a failure and I'm basing that on actual information, times when I failed, then how can I, in one session, suddenly feel like I'm a success and really believe that? The What you need to do is put your attention on different scopes. Put your attention on the times when you have succeeded. Now, I know that sounds really, really simple, but that's how it's done. And the key again is in how it's structured. Because people can say, "Okay, Damon, I can think about a bunch of successes that I've had, but as soon as I stop thinking about them, I go back to feeling like I'm a failure." Yes, that's because those experiences, how they're being represented, the scope, are structured in such a way that they don't stay fixed and they don't hold the attention of your unconscious. And when that happens, that means they're replaced by, as soon as you stop thinking about it consciously, your unconscious still holding those other representations in place. And that's what you're paying attention to when you generalize yourself or categorize yourself or believe yourself to be a failure. Now that's what's scary about limiting beliefs, is that most of them are unconscious. So you don't even realize how much they're affecting you. Now, what do you think happens when you believe you're a failure? Well, you'll find a way to fail because it's more important to stay connected to what you perceive as reality, because to disconnect from that would create cognitive dissonance. It would also create chaos and confusion. Because if you identify yourself a certain way and then you act in opposition to that, then you reach this place of, I don't know who I am, even. And that's a very scary place to be. So we would rather not fulfill our potential. We would rather not fulfill our values if it means that we slip into chaos and confusion about who we are, because that's really scary. I mean, that's where, a lot of mental illness comes from. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can learn how to restructure these scopes of our experiences so that both our conscious and our unconscious minds fixate on what makes you feel and believe and categorize yourself and generalize yourself to be what you value. And to use the example that I've been using, that would be success. So, yes, you literally can start a coaching session believing you are a failure. And by the end of it, believe you are a success. And this is not faking it, not faking it at all. Because what we do is we just have to restructure the information, times when you succeeded, into a structure that creates that fixation where your unconscious keeps that in its at attention. And then when you're paying attention to that information, it's like the instructions are telling you exactly, well, this is how you become successful. This is how you've done it before. So as you move into the unknown future, and we can also future pace and create future examples of you doing that, of being successful, as you move into the future, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You look for those opportunities. You believe you are successful, so you will find a way to succeed. So if you believe you are a failure, you will find a way to fail. If you believe you are successful, you'll find a way to succeed. Eventually, with if a person who believes themselves to be a failure, eventually they'll stop trying. Like they won't keep trying and slamming themselves up against a wall. They'll give up. And that's the worst thing. The worst thing is giving up on your values. Then it's all over, in the sense of there's life will feel very purposeless at that point. And it's really hard to come out of that. I've been there before. You might have been there before. Really hard to come out of that, but you can. You can come out of that. All right. So that in general is scoping category. It took me a few years to understand scoping category. So I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible here. And you might be saying, okay, I get it, Damon. I understand what you're putting out there. There's the scope, and then there's how I evaluated it. And that's breaking it down, or that's simplifying it to its simplest form. Now, how does all this play out in your life? That's where it gets a little more detailed. And that's where it takes actual experience of applying this to understand, to have the full understanding. So yes, this is a theory, but the full understanding of the theory comes when you experience it, when you practice it, like real life practice. All right, so I'm going to clear this out. Now, some of you might be new to NLP, so I'm going to just break this down. There's Neuro Linguistic Programming. I've done many videos on this, so I'm not going to go into too much depth of this. Neuro, meaning the interface of your five senses with the information you're taking in from those five senses, and then how you represent or represent that information internally with whatever senses you decide to use. We don't represent our memories in all five senses. I've already talked a little bit earlier about that. We don't need to, because that would be too much. This is where we create a map of reality. And that's what I'm talking about. You're living in a simulation. It's not that what you're living in isn't true or real. It's just the difference between a map and a territory. So the territory is actual reality, right? Which is something you will never actually know directly. What you do know is how you've mapped that territory. And in that territory, some things are going to be missing, because if you were to create a map and you were to recreate a perfect map that included every detail, then you've lost what is valuable about a map. The fact that it's a shortened version where you remove the details that you don't need to get to where you want to go. Okay. And a beautiful map that we all know is language. That language is a map of reality. And this is where the linguistic comes from. It's one of the most basic maps of reality that we have, and complex at the same time. Basic because we all have it, complex because it's infinitely complex. And it affects everything that you do and everything that you think and everything that you believe. You cannot escape language as a map of reality. You can modify it, you can change it, and this is where NLP becomes quite a brilliant model to use. So language is a map, and you might be saying, well, I still don't quite get what you mean by it's a map of reality. So you're understanding everything that I'm saying. I'm not having to show it all to you. For example, if I say apple, right? I don't have to show you an apple. I can say the word. But when I say the word, I'm not showing you an apple. As soon as I say the word, you're representing apple in your mind. There's not a little person inside your head who goes and looks up apple in a dictionary and defines it and says, okay, now I know what you're talking about. No, you understood instantly. Everything that I'm saying, you're understanding instantly. Why? Because you're representing everything that I'm saying in your mind and your neurology. Because I could say sour. I could say, imagine biting into a lemon. You might have puckered when I said that, because you had to represent it. And as soon as you represented it, there was a memory there that associates sour with the lemon and how that affects the way that you taste. You didn't bite into a lemon. I didn't show you a lemon. None of those things. So we're working within the same map, but how you represent it is going to be different than how I represent it, and how you represent it's going to be different from everyone else. But we have a common map. You know what a lemon is when I say it. And that's a linguistic map. And programming is how we start to shortcut things. This is important because if we didn't have a way to create a program around something, which another word would be, I guess a simpler word would be like a habit. If we didn't have a program for everything, then everything in the world would have everything that you do every single day, you'd have to decide upon all over again. And that would just take too much energy, too much time. It's not efficient. So we create a program. I wake up in the morning, wash my face, brush my teeth, that whole thing. I don't have to think these things through. This is my programming. This is what I do. Now, when we talk about scope and category, which is a theory of NLP, the categories are the programming. I already know what I think about something. I already know what I believe about something. Now, the hard part is that, we're trying to shortcut and be efficient with our lives. Once we understand something, once we believe something, we just want to move on to other things. But beliefs are always limited. Beliefs are a projection onto, they're a limited projection onto an infinite reality or an infinite objective reality. So there's always going to be limitation in my programs, or they, and don't go on a witch hunt trying to pull out all your limitations out of your programming. Their limitations are there for a good reason. That's what makes them so efficient. At the same time, they can be problematic. They can have your beliefs about yourself. You're trying to, you're trying to pin down reality. You're trying to figure out this world around you. And so you're creating programs around it. But sometimes we create programs that are too limiting, like beliefs about yourself that are not good, like I'm a failure or I'm a bad person or any of those things. Those are programs, they're beliefs. Beliefs are programs that limit me. Okay. So we want to make sure that our beliefs about ourselves, about the world around us, that they're not very limiting, that they enable us to do what we want to do and with the least amount of limitation and holding us back in what we do want to do. All right. So we're going to clear this out. So that's the technology. Like I said, scope and category is the theory. Neuro Linguistic Programming is the technology or the model that we use, the meta model that we use. And then there is the self-concept model, also created by Steve Andreas. And this is the most powerful model. Not just the most powerful NLP model, the most powerful model, period. I've never come across anything this powerful, because when you're working at the level of identity and you're changing beliefs and you can transform beliefs about your identity, that changes everything. Your identity, your self-concept is the mother of all of your beliefs. When you change a belief about yourself, it will change what you believe about reality. For example, if I believe I live in a hostile world, so that's a belief about the external, right? And it's a belief about everything that's going on around me. What would I have to believe about myself for that to be true? Well, it could be a number of things, but one possible belief that I would have to believe about myself is that I'm a victim. So if I believe that I'm a victim, then I typically would believe that the world around me is a hostile place. Now I could go after that belief about the world being a hostile place and try to change that. But it's going to be really hard to change if I continue to believe that I'm a victim. It's the same thing with the failure and the success. So if I believe that my failure in business is because I'm in the wrong business, which was true, my insurance business, I can change businesses. Okay. If I believe that I'm in the wrong market, I can change markets. But if I believe I'm a failure, I take that everywhere I go. Doesn't matter the market. It doesn't matter the business. I will find a way to fail until I stop trying and then give up. So this is why you want to work on your beliefs about yourself. When you change those beliefs, that's what shifts your reality. So this model starts at the level of experience. So we have experiences. And an experience is a subjective thing. A lot of people say, well, no, I actually experienced it. How can that be subjective? The truth is, you've been living one continuous conscious stream of conscious your entire life, unending. And you can say, well, what about when I'm sleeping? You still have a level of consciousness, because if you didn't, when your alarm goes off, you wouldn't wake up. Even when people are comatose, there's a level of consciousness going on there. So you have an experience which has a beginning and an ending, right? You say, well, that was when I experienced that concert or going to that sporting event or when I got married. Those are experiences, and we talk about them as if they're things, and we talk about them as if, there's a point at which they started and there's a point at which they ended. But like I said, you don't really have that. You've been going through one stream of consciousness since you've been born. And so we mark in a beginning and we mark out an ending, and we say, okay, that was that experience. But the truth is we can go and say, well, what was happening before that led me up to that point? And then you can move that starting point further back. And you can move the ending point further back based on what happened afterward. You can still associate what happened afterward. So you can play with time frame. And as you do that, this is where we start playing with structure. As you're playing with structure, you will feel differently about that experience. You can try it. We're not going to do it right now, but if you think about an experience and you think about how much time was represented during that experience, it could be 5 minutes, could have been an hour, could have been 2 hours. If you were running a marathon, could have been all day. And play around with moving that starting point wherever you perceive that experience starting. So let's say it was a marathon, and I perceive, and I, by the way, don't ask me about running because I know there are people who just absolutely love running, and it's something that's like even a cultural thing or a subculture thing. When I talk about this, people go, "Oh, you're a runner too," and I'm like, "No, I don't like running." In fact, you might be able to see some marks on my face. I just got back from jujitsu. I'm more of a jujitsu yoga person. But anyway, you can think of the start of the marathon and you say, okay, that's when the experience started. And at the end of the marathon, when I crossed the finish line, that's when it ended. But some of you might not think about it that way if you ran a marathon. You might just immediately go to the ending where you cross the finish line. And so it's only like a moment or the moment it started. You might just say, oh, well, that's, you might represent it just by that, just that moment you started the marathon and you started running. But you can play around with this and say, okay, well, what happened before that? Well, you probably trained for the marathon. So you can stretch that time frame back to when you trained. And then what happened after you crossed the finish line? Well, maybe you hung out with the other marathon runners or you went out and had a good time or something like that. So you could connect that. So you can open that time frame even wider, or you could even shrink it back down. Like I said, you could just think of it as right when you cross the finish line. And as you do this, you're changing the scope is what you're doing. When you're playing with time frame, you're playing with structure, which is changing the structure of the scope. And when you do that, you'll notice you actually will feel differently about that experience. So it goes back to what I was saying, changing structure. It's much easier to change structure to affect the way that you feel about an experience, how you evaluate it or what you believe about it. It's so much easier to change structure. And that is the brilliance of NLP because if you're trying to change content, I talk about this a lot. It's like trying to cheer someone up who's depressed. It doesn't work. In fact, you might even make them feel worse. Why? Because you're trying to give them new content without changing the structure. The same thing with affirmations. The reason why I know that affirmations have never worked for me, and I know for most people they don't work, is because you're trying to tell yourself something that structurally you do not believe is true. If I look in the mirror and I say I'm a billionaire, some part of me says, no, you're not. And that's a good thing because you need to stay grounded in reality. So trying to fool yourself is not the key here. But from the failure to the success, like I was talking about, you can restructure that and you can take actual experiences where you have succeeded that you're overlooking. And if you restructure them, then they will automatically categorize you as being successful. So as we select and collect experiences, they turn into qualities, qualities of who you are. We can say aspects of who you are. And qualities can be negative or positive. So if I have a bunch of happy experiences and I associate myself with those experiences, I can just say, well, I can categorize myself as I'm a happy person. And that's something I believe about myself. And if I believe that about myself and I value happiness, it feels pretty good. And it becomes a self fulfilling prophecy. I will get out there and find ways to be happier and happier and fulfill happiness. But if I believe I'm unhappy, then I've got to toe that line. I've got to stick to that reality because what's even scarier than sticking to that reality is chaos, confusion. I don't know who I am. That's really, really scary, like I mentioned before. So qualities are negative and positive. We don't really make that distinction. It's more like generalizations about who you are, generalizations about myself, generalizations you make about yourself. And when you generalize all of your qualities into one big generalization, you get identity. This is where identity comes from. Unfortunately, I have to erase the title on here. So make room. It's a nifty little tool. I'm still getting used to it. when I was preparing for this, I was thinking, oh, I got to break out my whiteboard and I got to set up my camera and my lights and everything. I was like, why don't I just get one of these tablets? So your identity is the generalization of all of the generalizations you make about yourself. The generalizations you make about yourself are created by your experiences. When you select and collect experiences into categories about who you are, that turns into beliefs about who you are, which is, I'm using beliefs and qualities interchangeably here. When you generalize all those qualities about who you are into one generalization, we get identity. Now, by the way, if you know NLP or you know logical levels or both, this is a true logical levels model. True NLP is based on true logical levels models. Now, some of you are going, wait a minute, isn't that something that Robert Dilts created? No, it is not. Logical levels is a theory that was created by a man named Gregory Bateson, who they don't consider one of the founders of NLP, but he had a profound influence on John Grinder and Richard Bandler when they were creating NLP. He was a teacher at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where NLP was created. He was an anthropologist, and he created a theory called logical levels about how we stack the logical levels of categories. And this is about how we make sense of the world around us. It's also how we make sense of ourselves. Neurological levels created by Robert Dilts is something Robert created later and has gotten a lot of criticism from people like um, John Grinder, Steve Andreas, my mentor, and they were saying it's not logical levels, it's not neurological, it's not logical, and that I've done videos about that too. If you want to see that, it's neurological levels is not a true logical levels model. Okay, so a level above this, how I feel about my identity is going meta to this generalization I make about myself, and that is where you get self-esteem. No, you do not get self-esteem from saying affirmations. You don't get self-esteem from vision boards, and you don't get self-esteem from faking it. That's uh it always surprises me when I see this over and over again in videos where they say fake it till you make it. Fake confidence can never become real confidence. If you like yourself, if you like the generalization you have about yourself, you're going to feel self-esteem, which is what? It's when you align your behaviors with your values. That's where self-esteem comes from. It takes things even further when you believe you are your values. So if you value success and you believe you are successful, your self-esteem is going to go up and it's going to stay up. It's not going to drop down. If you truly believe you are, it's going to stay up. So if you know all of your highest values and you transform all of your highest values into beliefs about who you are, into qualities, what happens? Your self-esteem goes up and it stays up. It stays elevated. And this is not the same as arrogance, by the way. Self-esteem and arrogance are two different things. Arrogance is an indication of a shaky and unstable identity, a shaky and unstable sense of self. So, what is arrogance? Arrogance is faking confidence. When you're faking it, that means you're faking it because you don't feel sure about it. If you don't feel sure about it, faking it more is not going to help you. And it gets even worse if you get exposed or you do something dangerous, like thinking you can do something that you can't, and it ends up hurting you physically. Not where you want to be. So you want to be the qualities that you value. And that's why this is where we work on qualities. Every time you transform a quality about who you are and you go from unsure to sure or certain about being a quality that you value, you increase your self-esteem. It becomes more a self-fulfilling prophecy. You do more of it. So if you did this with the quality of success because you value success, you're still going to have failures. That's normal. That's a part of success. But if you truly believe you are a success, you know that and you accept that. And so as you fail, you know that each failure is getting you closer and closer to your next success. So it's not so scary. You don't take it personally. It's not a hit to your self-worth, because the more you do this, the more you will realize that there is no such thing as self-worth. There's no way to measure your worth. So what do people do when they try to measure their worth? And you can't. There's no like measurement that can do that. What do people do? They compare themselves to other people. And that's a trap again, because you're always going to run into people who you perceive as being of more worth than you, of more value than you. So comparison is just going to end up creating more problems in the long run. It's fine to compare notes with somebody's more successful than you, and you want to know what they're doing because you want to get that kind of success. That's fine. There's a slight bit of comparison in there, but it's not comparison of who you are. It's not comparison of your worth or your value. Okay, so this is the self-concept model. Of course, there's more details to it and there's more that goes into it. But I wanted to get that out there. Now I want to turn to, if you've seen the video of Paul, what I was working with him in that video of identity shifting. So let's see if I can do this without breaking out the. So I'm going to make a little dot here. I should just put Paul. And I'm going to do this. Just the circle really is Paul's awareness. Okay, so there's Paul, the physical, physical person, but our awareness goes beyond our physical body. So his five senses are going to be within this circle: what he sees, what he hears, what he can touch. And then, of course, there's beyond his awareness, which he has no access to. So that's what the circle means. Now, Paul believed that one of his qualities that he liked about himself was that he's empathetic. So when I was working with Paul, I wanted to model a quality that was certain about him, that he felt certain about himself. And so if I can know how he's doing that, if I can understand, if I can elicit the structure of that, then all I need to do is take the qualities that he values that he feels like he's not, which is, having a tremendous limiting effect on his self-esteem and how he feels about himself. If I can map that information into this structure of a quality that's already certain, that's the transformation. That's when it happens. But as I was mapping that, and you'll see this in the video, he started giving me clues. He started giving me clues about how he actually feels about this quality. And so I said to Paul, I said, how do you know you're an empathetic person? And I wanted to know how he defined this. And he says, because I like to help people. And I said, okay, do you also help a lot of people? And so I'm going to put some people out here. So just for fun, this is like the people Paul has not met yet, but when they come into his awareness, Paul likes to help people, which is a great quality, right? It's awesome. It's awesome that he's really into that, feels good about that, believes that about himself. And because he believes that about himself, it elevates his self-esteem. All good stuff, right? But the way he was talking, he kept dropping clues. He kept dropping clues about his empathy was only directed toward other people and not himself. And I started to pick up on this. And it started to make sense why he was undercutting his success. He wanted to start a business. He had already started it, but it was in the beginning phases and he couldn't seem to really get it off the ground. And it turned out he was actually had a successful business before and he ended up getting rid of it. So these were all little clues that were coming up and I'm like, okay, something's going on here. And the more he talked, the more I realized he was actually engaging in a kind of cognitive dissonance. He did not include himself in his own empathy. And we do this a lot. So we make categories about ourselves, qualities about ourselves. We believe we are these qualities. And somehow we decided to exclude ourselves, which doesn't make any sense. So there's your perception of yourself, the self concept. That's one category. And I just went through how that all works out, right? Experiences to qualities, experiences get generalized into qualities, qualities get generalized into your identity. So how he perceives himself, his self concept, is one category. And then his empathy, another belief about himself, maybe I should draw this out again, a quality about himself, he was somehow excluding himself. Now this creates a lot of cognitive dissonance because how can it's a logical fallacy. How can you be an empathetic person and how can you be a person and not include yourself in your own empathy? And that's where I got him. And I had to be careful because he was very smart and he had really he could see if I was telegraphing where I was going with something. So I had to kind of fly below radar. And so I say, "Okay, so you're an empathetic person, right, Paul?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Because you like to help people, right?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Are you a person?" And he was like, "Well, yeah." And I said, "Include yourself in your own empathy." And that's when the transformation happened. So if that doesn't sound profound to you, I mean, it's simple, but what would most coaches do? If you think about in personal development, what would most coaches do? So let's just draw another circle here. We'll call that category of person. So Paul knows he's a person. He is empathetic because he likes to help people, but somehow he's excluding himself, which is causing a lot of friction, it's causing a lot of pain on himself. And it comes from, this belief that, oh, I don't deserve it. Who knows exactly where that came from? But we don't need to know all that either. All I had to do was tell him to just include himself in his own empathy. But what most coaches would have done is they would have continued this illusion of a separation of person and his empathy and would say, well, you need to be more empathetic toward yourself. So this only feeds the delusion of separation. Okay, so yeah, I'm a person, and then there's this empathy, and somehow I got to give that empathy to myself. No, it doesn't have to be that complicated. All you have to do is get rid of this. That's all. Get rid of the separation. You are the source of your resources. That's why it's called resource, right? We all have it in us. We might not believe it about us, but we all have it. And this is the same problem. Let's see. This is the same problem. And I hear this more than anything. I don't hear a lot about self empathy and personal development. What I hear a lot about is something called self love. And every time I hear, well, I didn't get that. Let's see. Self love. Sounds good, right? Now, I'm not saying this because I don't want people to love themselves. What I want to do is I want to clear out the noise for you. Okay. So the way that most people are perceiving this, let's see. They're perceiving that there is a self, that's me, and then there's this thing called love, like it's just floating around in the air. And I go to listen to a teacher or I go to a coach and they realize what I realized about Paul, that he was not including himself. And they go, oh, well, you need to learn to love yourself. I remember the first time I was told this, and I was like, yeah, that's the problem. I was like, well, how do I do that? When I actually went to think about it, how do I actually love myself? Well, you are the source of the love. Love is a resource that exists inside of you. And the truth is, even though we think we feel the love from other people, we get the clues, the indication, the touch, the look, all those things, and that all makes us feel great, right? But the truth is that the only love you ever feel is the love that's inside of you. The source of love is you. So all you need to do is recognize that. And this is the true self. But if you continue the separation, you're only creating more friction. You're only feeding the conflict. You're only feeding that delusion of separation. So we don't want to do that. So another way of, we can bring these circles back, and maybe it's more like this. Oh, that's a little stubborn. There we go. So it might be more like this. Nope, I can't. Yep. There's what I'm conscious of, and then there's my love, and then everything else is unconscious. That might be more accurate. But what I'm asking you to do right now, what I'm asking you to do right now is to become conscious of this so that you can dissolve this separation. And this goes for anything that you put self in front of. It's very common. Well, I need more self-respect. I need more self-love. I need more self-empathy or self this, self that. Just get rid of the self. Get rid of the self part. You are the source of love. You are the source of your empathy. You are the source of your respect. So stop imagining that it's something separate that you then have to overcorrect by trying to give it to yourself. That just creates a lot more problems, a lot more friction, a lot more conflict. All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to cover. Well, we've been doing this. Okay, I've been at it for a while. There's so much more to say about this. But I'm going to go ahead and. All right. Ooh, we got a lot of comments. I don't know if I'm going to get through them all. Let's see. What makes restructuring past experience into the chosen structure stick permanently? It's a good question. It's really comes down to finding that structure that makes things feel certain. And so when I was talking about with Paul, I was trying to lock on to a quality that he felt certain about. It's whatever when I find that structure, when I elicit that structure indicates certainty for that person. So again, we think it's the content that makes us feel a certain way. And the content has something to do with it. I don't want to say that it has nothing to do with it. It does, but it's that structure that makes you feel certain about it. So we find the structure of certainty, and then we map in the information that needs to be there. Thanks for all the kind words, everyone. Can a belief be expansive if it's technically itself a boundary limit? It's used as a buzzword and self-help, and I kind of got stuck with the semantics, and I made myself a new problem. So I know not quite sure what you mean by expansive, but beliefs are always in play. So here's the other thing too. Some people might say, well, when I change a belief, what will make it stay? Like why, what makes it so that it doesn't go away? And it's like, well, if you think about all the beliefs that you have right now, most of them are unconscious, and you don't have to practice them. You're just living your life, and as you're living your life and taking in information, you're selecting and collecting that information in a way that fits your beliefs. So it's happening automatically. Now, when we can become conscious of these beliefs and we can elicit the structure of these beliefs, then we can change them. And then you can be more conscious about what you do want to believe. And then once we reset the structure, you don't have to practice them. They just function just like your current beliefs are functioning right now. That you're not practicing, it's just happening. It's an automatic program. And that's the beauty of the self-concept model. It's truly revolutionary. Should I just assume they mean self-supporting belief, more of what I want? So a lot of times people say, well, isn't this just semantics when you're saying this whole self-love thing, self-respect? And it's not, because words have implications. So if you're a map of reality, one of your biggest maps of reality is your language, your linguistic, your linguistic map. And if your linguistic map has implications of things being a certain way, you will tend to shape your reality that way. So if I believe I need to love myself because I don't love myself enough, what am I implying? That I have two separate parts of me, the part that does the loving and the part that receives the love. That implies I have two separate parts, when the truth is I'm one whole person, right? So you will function that way if you believe if you're talking about it as it's two separate things, you will run that risk of functioning that way. Oh, I have, this love inside of me, but I'm not giving enough to myself. And then this is the problem with metaphors, okay? Metaphors are great for transferring a certain understanding from one thing to the next, okay? It's really good at that. Why is it good at that? Because it lacks the real life details. You don't get stuck in the details, the differences. But when we're actually doing this stuff, the metaphors don't work because it doesn't tell you how to actually do this. So we have to turn the structure. And so if you're implying these things, the structure is going to respond. You're going to structure your reality based on those implications. And so I'm not saying that 100% that it always works exactly that way. Everybody's a little bit different, but why take the risk of implying those things? So is that where mapping comes into play, or do we work on values positioning? So I'm not sure what you mean by values positioning. So there's our values, which is our guide. What do we value? What is a value? It's a generalization about an experience that's important to you. That's a direct quote from Steve Andreas. A value is a generalization about an experience that's important to you. So your values are your guide to your fulfillment. If I value happiness, success, joy, peace, love, empathy, all of those things, if those are values of mine, then when I behave in alignment with them, when I live those values, even better if I believe those things about myself and a very like certain beliefs, that's where fulfillment comes from. How do I do that? Is by learning because each of you are slightly different. How does anyone structure beliefs about yourself that make you feel certain of those beliefs? That has a very real structure. It's unconscious until you bring it into consciousness. And once you know that structure, now you've got the code. Now you just can map in whatever information you need to map in to then believe that, and it will hold it in place and it will feel certain. Like I said, this is some really advanced stuff. That doesn't mean that if you're new to this that you can't understand it. You absolutely can. And in fact, I think one of the best ways to learn this is to start here, then get into the basics, and then keep coming back to this. That's what I kept doing. That's how I learned this. It took me years to really grasp it. The first time I started trying to learn scope and category, I was learning it from Steve's books. He was mentoring me at the time. And I just came back with so many questions. He was like, "Okay, Damon, put the books down for now." And I did. And then he said, "Go try the self-concept model and learn that model." So I learned that model and I got to a place with it where I could have predictable transformations. I could do this to myself and transform a quality in like less than an hour. And then I was using it with clients and I was doing the same thing. In less than an hour, they would transform. And then I went back to Steve and I said, "Okay, I think I'm ready to learn scope and category." And he said, "You've been doing it. Self-concept is based on scope and category. You've been doing it the whole time." And I was like, "What?" And that's when I realized you can only learn a theory so far before you actually start to experience it. And so Steve was brilliant. So what he did was Steve recognized that I had gone as far as I could go learning the theory, and then I was, stuck. There was nothing more I could learn the theory until I started to experience the theory. And so then here he says, go use the self-concept model. And the self-concept model was so practical that as I was practicing it and getting good at it, I was cultivating an understanding of scope and category because I was understanding how the model worked. And then that's when he said, you've already experienced it. And then I went back to his elephant books, Six Blind Elephants, volumes 1 and 2. I think they're actually behind me. And that's when it made a lot more sense because I had the experience. So like you can tell someone how to swim, like without ever getting in the water. But their understanding of how to actually swim is going to be limited until they get into the water and start swimming. I mean, there's just no other way to go around that, right? So the person, if you've never actually gotten in the water, you have a limited understanding of how to swim. And you still need to get that practice in and learn how to swim. So thank you, Damon. This was awesome. Well, you're very welcome. This isn't a self-concept course. We teach all of this in our self-concept program. Yes, absolutely. So like I said, check out that video with Paul. You'll see me actually working with a real client and doing this stuff. What was the books? Well, I don't know if I'd recommend Six Blind Elephants, volumes 1 and 2. That's Steve Andreas. Those books are not. They're not. I wouldn't recommend starting there. Start with Transforming Yourself, the book, and even this people struggle with without help. And like I said, I had Steve was mentoring me at the time when I was learning it, and so our program is basically that. Our program is you going through all of that information while we're mentoring you through it, while we're walking you through it, so you actually experience it. So you're like theory, experience, and you just keep bouncing back and forth from that. All right, we'll do this again. I really enjoy teaching this. I know it's pretty advanced, pretty out there stuff, but I want to get it out there. I want to share this with all of you. And the more you start to understand this, your life will absolutely transform, no doubt about it. All right, take care, everybody.